Today we're going to start an exciting adventure, the study of the Gospel of Mark in its original language in Greek, one verse per day so that everybody can follow, and no knowledge of Greek is needed though. We'll try to explain syntax, grammar in very simple terms. It will be accessible to everybody. We'll proceed slowly, very slowly, trying to uncover and provide you with as much information as possible. So to do that, we will sometimes have to jump back to the Old Testament, take a look at the original Hebrew of the Jewish Bible. Sometimes it will require us to dive into the original manuscripts, but again, no worries. I will try to explain everything that needs to be explained very thoughtfully. It will be an exciting journey. Surely it will be for me, and I hope also for you. So now, Mark. Why do I want to start with Mark? Well, I'm going to give you three brief reasons. Reason number one, Gospel of Mark is widely recognized by scholars as the first one of the four canonical Gospel. So now, here is obviously not the place to discuss the synoptic problem, but just let me tell you that I agree in general with the conclusion that the majority of the scholars got to. I believe that Mark was the very first gospel written, that Matthew used almost all of Mark material to write his gospel. You don't have to agree with me. I understand there may be different opinion on this. I'm just saying this is what my feeling is based on different reasons. I believe that it was written probably in a span of time that goes from the late 50s to the late 60s, around 30, 35 years after the death of Jesus. So studying the very first gospel ever written sounds pretty exciting to me. So this is my first reason. Second reason is that the Gospel of Mark is usually the neglected one. Okay, and I have a natural sympathy for the underdogs. The fact is that more than 90% of the material in Mark can be found also in Matthew. And so reading Mark becomes apparently useless, right? If you read Matthew, basically you also read Mark. Wrong. I don't think so. I don't agree with that. There are significant differences, sometimes bigger, sometimes smaller, but significant in syntax and style that cannot and should not be overlooked, and that instead give us very precious and valuable information by comparison with the understanding of the gospel. And we're even gonna be able to get to see one of these examples today. Third reason I'm gonna give is that the Gospel of Mark is the shortest. Why would I start from Matthew that contains more than 18,000 words when I can just start from Mark that only contains a little bit more than 11,000? All right, let's start reading. Kata Markan. So first thing to take a look at is this letter that looks like a P. It's not a P, it's a rho. It's a capital letter. This sounds like an R. Okay, so it's a Greek R letter. So that's why we read these as Markan. Okay, what about kata? Kata is a preposition that is widely used in Greek, and it indicates a downward motion. Okay, it's a downward motion usually along a slope. Okay, think about a ball rolling down a slope. Okay, there's that type of adherence to the surface as long as the ball rolls down that slope. So what does kata mean when we associate that to a person? Well, it retains that idea of adherence. So, in accordance with what somebody experiences, what somebody thinks, what somebody heard. So that's why we translate usually this kata with according to. Okay, so kata Markan, according to Mark. This is how the gospel of Jesus was experienced by Mark, how he heard about it, how he um, witnessed it, and so on and so forth. But the big question here is about Mark. Okay, who is this Mark? the question mark. Good. But who exactly is this Mark? And did Mark really write the Gospel of Mark? Doesn't this sound like a silly question? Well, you should believe me if I tell you that there are scholars out there that are furiously debating if Mark really wrote the Gospel of Mark. Now, of course, it all depends on who you think this Mark is, because definitely seems like there are possibly more Marks, multiple Marks. Now, who is this Mark that wrote the Gospel? All right, again, here's it's not the place where we should discuss the synoptic problem, okay? But I would just like to share a couple of thoughts with you on the identity of Mark. If we're about to read and study the Gospel of Mark, we should have at least a rough understanding of who Mark was. Now, Mark or Marcus in Greek, well, actually, is a Latin name, Marcus, okay? And a name like that, Mark or Marcus in Greek, comes up multiple times in the Acts of the Apostles. Luke talks about a certain guy called Marcus, okay, that pops up here and there through the Acts of the Apostles. So he's a person that basically goes with Paul multiple areas of Asia Minor in his evangelization journeys. Okay, and Luke talks about Mark and specified that Mark actually was just a surname. His real name was John. That was his Jewish name. But everybody would call him Mark. That was his Gentile name, his Latin name. Okay, so he was known as John Mark. Okay, which makes us understand that probably Mark or John Mark had a pretty good understanding both of Hebrew or Aramaic and Greek slash Latin. Okay. Now, what else do we know about this John Mark? Well, in Acts, Luke talks about the fact that John Mark was the son of Mary, one of the many Marys that appear in the gospel that were following Jesus. Okay. And Luke says that in Mary's house, it's where the disciples, many of the disciples, gathered to pray after Jesus' death. And so the tradition has it that that house, that same house where John Mark was growing up, was actually the same house where the Last Supper took place. Now, we don't know that for sure. Nobody knows that for sure, but that's the tradition. So we have a lot of information about this John Mark that traveled with Paul, that probably was part of a wealthy family, that probably knew both Hebrew, Aramaic, and Greek and Latin. Um, and at the same time, there is another Mark that is just appeared once, just called Mark, and it appears in the first letter of Peter, First Peter, chapter 5, verse 13. I'm going to read the verse because it's very important. It's Peter talking, saying, "The church that is at Babylon, elected together with you, salutes you, and so does Marcus, my son." So Peter, it's saying that he's writing from Babylon. This is understood to be Rome, just pseudonym for Rome. So Peter is in Rome, and he's sending greetings from himself and on behalf of his son Mark. Now, how is this understood? Usually, that Mark was not the real son of Peter. It was just a person that was so dear to Peter that it was almost like a son to him. Now, was this Mark that Peter is talking about the same John Mark that Luke talks about in the Acts of the Apostles? Of course, nobody knows. Somebody argues against this based on the fact that Paul and Peter were usually preaching in in different places. They got together, but just a few times. During usually they were preaching separately. They didn't have a lot of contacts. Sometimes they even argue between each other. So people tend Some people tend to not believe that the same Mark was at the same time with Paul and then with with Peter, but that could also have happened. Um, the other option is, of course, that well, Mark was was first both in these evangelization journeys with Paul, and then he became a companion of Peter, and so on and so forth. Nobody really knows. But the point here is not try to identify if what the Mark that Peter talks in his first letter is the same person that Luke talks about in the Acts of the Apostle, that is called John Mark. The point here that is important, I think, to stress is that the Mark that Peter talks about in his letter is very likely the guy that wrote the Gospel of Mark. There are many hints that point toward that direction. I believe that that is the case, and there's a lot of testimonies and a lot of internal evidence in the text that point in that direction. Now, again, here is not the right place to investigate further on the identity of Mark, but I'm just going to quote a passage that probably some of you are familiar with, which comes from somebody that was very close to the disciples of Jesus, that had direct contact with them, that heard from them, that lived at the end of the first century between 60 AD and 130 AD. So between the end of the first century and the beginning of the second century. It's called Papias, in Greek Papias, of Hierapolis. Hierapolis was a city in Turkey, in Asia Minor, the current Pamukkale. Okay, it's a pretty famous tourist place now in Turkey. So we don't have any original writing from Papias, but we have quotes attributed to Papias from a historian, Eusebius, that quotes Papias in one of his works. And there is a passage which is quoted entirely, which is very interesting, because Eusebius says that Papias used to say the following: Mark, indeed, who became the interpreter of Peter, wrote accurately, as far as he remembered them, the things said and done by the Lord, but not, however, in order. For he, Mark, had neither heard the Lord nor been his personal follower, but at a later stage, as I said, he had followed Peter, who used to adapt the teachings to the needs of the moment, but not as though he were drawing up a connected account of the oracles of the Lord. So that Mark committed no error in writing certain matters just as he remembered them, for he had only one objective in mind, namely to leave out nothing of the things which he had heard and to include no false statement among them. So what is Papias here supposedly telling us? Well, he's basically telling us that this Mark that was with Peter was, first of all, the interpreter of Peter. Okay, so Peter probably didn't know Greek and didn't know Latin. He only knew Aramaic. Okay, we know for a fact that he was not a literate person. Okay, so probably he spoke just a particular dialect. Okay, of Aramaic. So he needed definitely an interpreter in Rome. Okay, and this interpreter became exactly Mark. Okay, and so this fits well together with that passage in Peter when he says, that Mark considered Mark my son, right? So he became, a very important person for Peter, because he was his interpreter in Rome. Okay, and so Papias is saying that Mark, being the interpreter of Peter, heard Peter preaching and telling the gospel, telling about the stories about what Jesus said and did so many times, that basically at a certain point he decided to write down all these things. And those things became the Gospel of Mark. Now, this is an inference that we can make here. Papias is not using the word gospel, he's using the word logia, which here is translated as oracles, but it's pretty clear that he's talking about the things said and done by the Lord. So there's really no reason to think that this thing that Papias is talking about is something different than the Gospel of Mark itself. And as you have heard, the intent here of Papias is to kind of defend probably some criticism of the Gospel of Mark about the logical sequence of events. Okay, if you read the Gospel of Mark, you're going to realize that probably things are just recounted here and there, but there's sometimes no logical connection between the events. And Papias is saying this is perfectly acceptable. It's perfectly fine. Why? Because Mark was not a disciple of Jesus. He's very honest on that part. Okay, Mark was not an eyewitness of Jesus. He was not a disciple of Jesus. He was a follower of Peter, actually his interpreter. And so he's just reporting what Peter was preaching. Okay, and his only goal was reporting what he heard Peter saying as accurately as possible. Like he could possibly didn't know about the correct order of the events, and possibly it's very likely that when Peter was preaching and telling about the things that Jesus did during his life, he was not following an exact chronological sequence, right? He was teaching about one thing that he said, and then one event that happened, and then maybe another miracle that happened, and so on. Of course, there's no reason for Peter to go in a strict chronological order, and that's exactly why Mark wrote what he wrote without any concern about the accuracy of the chronological order. So after understanding all this, I would say that there's many more interesting reasons why we should study the Gospel of Mark. Think about that. The Gospel of Mark, if really this Mark was the interpreter of Peter, becomes really the Gospel of Peter, the most important disciple of Jesus, after all. And this makes perfect sense. Why do we have a Gospel of Matthew, a Gospel of John, but we don't have a Gospel of Peter? Well, guess what? The Gospel of Mark is actually the Gospel of Peter. Peter didn't write it, Mark wrote it, but it's the word that Mark heard from the mouth of Peter. When somebody is questioning that Mark actually wrote the Gospel of Mark, probably this type of argument, we don't really know if Mark was really the one who wrote the Gospel of Mark. Well, you know what? This is a very strong indication. You know, why in the world all the manuscripts that we have that were discovered in the next centuries, in the fourth, fifth, sixth centuries, and so on, they all agree that this gospel was written by Mark. There's, if this Mark was some person that was just invented, it wouldn't make any sense, right? If you would invent a person to give it credibility to a gospel, you would give it to probably Peter, not to an unknown Mark that nobody knew about. Okay, so the fact that this guy was kind of an anonymous person, known but definitely not prominent, and definitely not an eyewitness. And Papias honestly says, look, this guy was not an eyewitness. Okay, why would you, invent or come up with the name of the author of a gospel with somebody that clearly was not an eyewitness of Jesus? Doesn't make any sense. It must be true that this gospel was really written by somebody that was not an eyewitness of Jesus, but he was an eyewitness of Peter. So let's start reading Mark chapter 1, verse 1. Arche tu Evangeliu Jesu Christu uiu Theu. Beginning of the Gospel of Jesus Christ, Son of God. Pretty famous introduction to the Gospel of Mark. This first verse is usually considered the title of the Gospel. Well, this could be an interpretation, beginning of the Gospel of Jesus Christ, Son of God. But I think there's more to it. I don't think it's just a title. If it were just a title, this introduction, beginning of, would be a little superfluous. If you think about it, when you give a title to a book, you don't put beginning of, you just give the title, right? Uh, Pride and Prejudice, The Lord of the Ring, right? The title is not beginning of Pride and Prejudice or beginning of The Lord of the Rings, right? So I think there's more to it. And so we're going to try to discover and uncover this more by breaking it down. Actually, this first verse in Mark, it's so rich in the type of meaning and information that he's providing us that we could even conclude that all the Gospel of Mark is kind of condensed in this first verse. There's so much to say about this first verse. So let's break it down word by word. And let's focus our attention on the very first word, arche. Okay, you find it here, arche. Now, you see this first letter here, it's an alpha. It sounds exactly like an A. Okay, sound A. And then you have these three letters. The second letter is a rho, which we already found sounds like an R. Is the lowercase of this uppercase R that we saw in Markan. And the third letter here that looks like an X, it actually carries a strong guttural sound like a K. Okay, it's usually transliterated as CH, but doesn't carry the sound ch. It carries the sound k. Okay, and then this last letter, which looks like a N, it's actually a vowel. It's a long E. Okay, usually there's a bar on top of it to make it clear that it's long, and there's also an accent there. So it's RK. Okay, so RK means beginning, means origin. Now think about um, all the words in English that start with this type of word. Think about archetype, right? An archetype is the original model, right? So it has this root from the Greek arche, or archaeology, right? It's the study of the old things, the things that were at the beginning, and so on and so forth, right? But arche, it's also not just a common word to indicate the beginning of something. It's something much more profound than that. If you think about all the Greek philosophy, and especially the beginning, the fathers of the Western philosophy, the school of Miletus, okay, up to Aristotle and more, they all debate about this concept of arche. Okay, this word is not just one word; is the word that the philosopher debate on the meaning of that. It represents something very fundamental. It represents the prime principle, the that substance, that original substance from which everything else is generated. Really, it's something, some sort of divine substance that creates everything else, everything that we see. So the first philosophers, one of their first goal was to try to understand and give order to the chaos that we see out here. Okay, and so they were trying to reduce the chaos to one single primordial substance from which you could explain everything else. And to this thing, to this primordial substance, primordial principle, they gave the term arche. So you start understanding how profound this type of term is. It represents not just the general beginning, but really the origin of everything. And much more so if you think about um, how, for example, the Bible itself starts. So the first book of the Bible, it's called Genesis, right, in English. Well, guess what? Genesis means origin, means beginning. Okay, and how does the Bible starts? It says, "In the beginning." Okay, in the beginning,
um, Bereshit in Hebrew, where you may recognize the root of the word Rosh, right, which means head. Okay, Rosh Hashanah. It's the head. It's the first day of the Jewish year, right? A lot of Jews celebrate Rosh Hashanah. So Bereshit, in the beginning, it's translated in Greek, in the Greek of the Septuagint, um, with the formula ente exactly this word, in the beginning, in the origin. Okay, so probably it's not a coincidence that Mark wants to start his gospel with exactly the same word with which the Bible itself starts. Genesis 1 1, Bereshit, in the beginning, ente. Okay, and again, think about the Gospel of John. John 1 1 exactly takes the beginning of Genesis and reproduces it in its Gospel. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And John takes exactly the first three words of Genesis, ente arche. You start understanding how much more profound this term is than just beginning. It's not just a general beginning, it's really the creation, it's just the origin of everything. What is Mark trying to tell us? He's trying to tell us that the gospel of Jesus Christ marks really a new beginning, a new Genesis, a palingenesis, okay, a completely transformation and create new creation of the whole humankind. All right, beginning of what? To Evangelio, of the gospel. All right, let's give some brief information about the letters that make up this word. So the first letter is this tau that looks like a T and sounds like a T. And then this omicron that looks like a no and sounds like a no. And then a upsilon that looks like a U and sounds like a U. Easy enough. The only thing to remember is that when you find an O and U together, very often, most of the time, they make up a sound that sounds like a double O, like in good. All right. So this is pronounced not toe, but two. All right. So what is this two? Two is the definite article, the, and in particular is at the genitive case. All right. So it means of the. So the definite article in Greek is not like in English that is always the. All right, it changes. Okay, and according to the ending, you can understand what case we're talking about, what gender, and what number. Right, in this case is associated with a word evangelion, which is neuter and singular at the genitive case, and so also the definite article is um, takes the genitive neuter singular ending, omicron upsilon. And it's very interesting to notice this ending o upsilon that appears one, two, three, four times, six times. Okay, here. So arche tu evangelio Jesu Christu huiu theu. Okay, a lot of alliterations here, definitely. So two means of the what? Evangelio. So you have this epsilon that looks like an E and sounds like an E. Then you have your upsilon, and then you have this alpha that looks like an A and sounds like an A. And then you have two gammas, which probably you encountered in math classes. Usually sounds like a G, but when they're back to back, the first gamma is actually softened into an N. All right. So gamma gamma is pronounced as NG. All right. Then you have your epsilon, it's like an E, your lambda, which is an L, your iota that looks like an I, sounds like an I, and then your omicron and upsilon again. Okay. And the accent is on the iota, right? So you pronounce this evangeliu, all right? Evangeliu. Now, let's try to find the meaning of this word. Well, we know that it's translated as gospel, but what's the connection between the Greek word evangelion and the English gospel, we're going to see that there's actually a very intimate connection. To understand that, we need to understand the origin of this word, the meaning of this word, evangelion. Now, when Mark, Matthew, Luke, and John were writing their gospels, they didn't know they were writing a gospel as we intend them today, right? Today, when we talk about the gospels, we basically mean those books that were written by Mark, Matthew, Luke, and John. All right, that's exactly why they're called evangelists, because they wrote the gospels, right? But at that time, the word evangelion just meant something a little different. It meant exactly what the Greek word evangelium meant. All right, to understand the meaning of this word, we need to break it down like this in two parts. The first part is just made up of these two letters, epsilon, upsilon, eu. All right, eu in Greek means good. Think about all the English words that may start with EU. For example, euthanasia, good death, or euphemism. It's a good way of saying something bad. Or even the proper name, Eugene, all right, contains something good in it. So most of the time, English words that start with the letters EU, it's because they come from a Greek word that contains the idea of something nice or something good, all right? The second part comes actually from the Greek word angelos, all right? Angelos reminds a lot of the English word angel, all right? And that's exactly where the word angels is coming from the Greek word angelos. Well, guess what? The Greeks didn't have an idea what the angels were as we intend them today, right? They didn't have angels in their mythology, angels with wings and so on, right? They didn't believe in angels. Now, so how were they using the word angelos? Well, simply to indicate a messenger, somebody that would bring a message. All right, there was a messenger. Angelos in Greek simply means messenger. It's a person. Okay, and that's exactly why angels are called angels, because they're messengers of God. All right, so evangelion means good message, good news. It's a nice announcement. All right, so we are in the position now to understand why in English this word evangelion is translated as gospel. What's the connection there? Well, if you look it up, gospel comes from some old English roots that exactly mean good news. All right, God is the English root from for good, and spell is the English root for news. Okay, so literally, gospel means good news. All right, so now we understand that what Mark is trying to tell us here. All right, this is the arche to evangelio, is the origin, is the beginning of the good news of what? Of Jesus Christ, Son of God. So Jesus is coming to the world, and this is the good news, and this brings a new creation. All right, let's move on to the next word, the easy one, Yesu. Okay, this is the Greek word for Jesus. It's in the genitive case. Okay, it ends with O, U, as we have seen before. If we add a sigma at the end, that would be the name of Jesus, Jesus. All right. Now, in the genitive, it means of Jesus. Arche to Evangelio Jesu, the beginning of the gospel of Jesus. Now, Jesus or Jesus is the Greek name for Jesus that transliterates a Hebrew name. I'm going to try to write it here. So we're going to try to see the connection. Okay. So Hebrew reads from right and writes from right to left. Okay. So in Hebrew, the name of Jesus was Yeshua. Okay. With a yod, with a vowel, double two dots, look like two dots. It's a vowel. It's a long E. Yesh, the shin letter that looks like a W with a dot here on top on the right side. And then the vowel U. Please pardon my writing here. And then the final guttural letter ayin that looks like a Y with and long A at the end. So this reads Yeshua. Okay, that was the Hebrew name of Jesus. Now, why I'm mentioning this? It's because in English, Jesus, the word Jesus doesn't really mean anything. It's just a proper name. But in Hebrew, Yeshua has a very particular meaning. Yeshua comes from the root of a verb, which is yasha, which means to save. All right. So Yeshua is basically who saves. Okay. It's a savior. So you see the obvious connection there. Matthew brings this up in his gospel, saying that um, baby Jesus was named Jesus because he would save humanity from their sins. And um, if you don't know the Hebrew origin of the name Jesus, you may wonder, why does Matthew associate the name Jesus with the idea of salvation? Well, this is why. Okay. In particular, this name, if we add hey at the end, which sounds like an H, and then we change this vowel actually to thus like this reads Yeshua. Okay, and this really means salvation. This is the Hebrew word for salvation. So you see how similar, okay, and what kind of close connection there is with between the name of Jesus in Hebrew, Yeshua, and the word salvation in Hebrew, Yeshua. Okay, next word, Christou. This is easy. Yesu Christou, Jesus Christ. Pretty easy, right? So here we have the letter key, which sounds like a K. We already saw this. It's transliterated usually with a C and an H. Then we have a rho that transliterates in an R, then an iota. And this is a new letter that we see now. It's a sigma. It's transliterated as an S, and then a tau, which is a T, and then again O and U. So Christou, all right? Christou. Now, what does Christos mean? Well, a lot of people thinks that Christ is just the last name of Jesus. Okay, Jesus Christ. No, there's a particular meaning behind the word Christ. Christos. Christos in Greek means anointed. It's an adjective that you see. It's in complete accordance with Yesu. Okay, Yesu is masculine singular genitive, ou, and so the adjective Christos takes the ending ou to be in accordance with the masculine singular genitive case. Okay, beginning of the gospel of Jesus Christ. Again, what's the meaning of the word Christ? Anointed. Now, why is Jesus called anointed or the anointed? Well, we need to again jump back to the Hebrew. Okay, so in Hebrew, only very important people were anointed. Usually the kings were anointed, okay, when they would take power, or prophets were anointed, okay. And in that case, they would become this word. I'm going to try to write it here again, okay, in Hebrew. Again, please pardon my writing, okay. So this is an M, okay. Then there is a long a shin that we already saw, and then an I, long I with a yod, and then finally this guttural sound that sounds like Mashiach. Okay, Mashiach. If a king was anointed, he would become a Mashiach. Now, what does Mashiach mean in Hebrew? Well, probably you already realized because it sounds very similar. Messiah. Okay, Mashiach, Messiah. So when we say that Jesus was the Messiah, well, Messiah is just an English transliteration of the Hebrew word Mashiach, which means anointed. Okay, so you see all the connection, right? Christos means the Messiah. Okay, well, with the article in front. Okay, ha. Okay, ha-Mashiach. Okay, ha-Mashiach, the Messiah. Now, if all the kings and prophets were anointed, it was a common practice for very important people. What's so special about Jesus that it's called the Christ, the Messiah? Okay, well, we need to understand the idea of the Messiah. So Christ is not just a Messiah, it's not just a Mashiach, is HaMashiach, is the Messiah, is the Messiah that was prophesied in the Old Testament and that the Jews were waiting for. Probably you know that throughout all the Testament there are messianic prophecies about the arrival of a person, of a leader that would save the Jews, right, and bring peace to the world, and so on and so forth. There's all sorts of messianic prophecies around that. But Jews at the time of Jesus were really waiting. They really thought the Messiah would just pop up, you know, right there at that moment. That they kind of knew it because there are very specific prophecies in the Old Testament. That was the period when the Messiah was supposed to come, right? And so when you understand how, the excitement of the disciples of Andrew and Peter, when Andrew goes to Peter in the Gospel of John and says, "We found the Messiah," it's him, right? It's him. That's that's the meaning of the word Christos. So what is Mark telling us here? He's not just telling us that Jesus was anointed. Yes, he was anointed with the Holy Spirit, through the baptism in the Jordan and so on and so forth. But the most important part of the information that Mark is trying to convey here is that Jesus is the Messiah that the Jews were waiting. They had been waiting for hundreds of years, for so long. Okay, so a lot of information here already that if we just read uh, at the very superficial level, we're gonna completely miss, right? Again, we saw that arche is not just simple the beginning of the book, the beginning of the gospel. It has this profound meaning of origin, of new creation, of palingenesis. Okay, brought forth by what? By this good news. Evangelion is not just gospel. Gospel means good news. Is this very joyful announcement of the salvation brought forth by Jesus. And Jesus means exactly salvation. And Jesus is called the Christ because he is the Messiah that the Jews were waiting. They had been waiting for so long. This is what Mark, all the information that Mark is condensing in just these few words. All right, we're getting there. Last two words. All right, let's get them together. Uyu theu. All right. So here, no new letters until this one. This is a theta. It's usually translated as with a th. Okay, it has a sound of the. Okay, theu. Okay, so the word, and again, you see that all of them are in the genitive, singular, masculine. Why? Because this is again in accordance with Jesus. Jesus is Christos, means anointed, the Messiah, and he's also Uyu Theu, Uyos Theu, um, Son of God. All right. So Uyos in Greek means um, son, and Theos means God. All right. So Uyu Theu is Son of God. All right. Now, you probably noticed something very particular here. There's some brackets. Why this expression Son of God is between brackets? Well, it's because it's not sure that Mark really put this expression in his original gospel. How do we know that? Well, because we have some manuscripts that contain this part, this expression, and another manuscript that doesn't. So when scholars compare the manuscripts of the New Testament that were discovered throughout the centuries, and they do textual criticism, if they find complete accordance among the manuscript, they conclude that that's probably the original text. And when they find some discrepancies, then that's where they start arguing what happened there. And if a manuscript has a certain expression and another manuscript doesn't, then they start questioning, well, was this thing added later? Was it something that some copies came up with and just added there? Was it there originally and then it was lost? And so on and so forth. So that's why they're putting these brackets, because this expression is not 100% sure that was written by Mark. Now, I'm going to show you something very, very interesting right now. We're going to go and dive into the original manuscripts, not all of them, the most important one, where the Gospel of Mark was found, to compare and see which ones have the expression Ou Theou, Son of God, and which ones don't. What you're looking at here is an excerpt from the Codex Siniaticus. Okay, what is Codex Siniaticus? Is one of the most important manuscripts ever found, where the whole New Testament can be found. Okay, it's a fourth century manuscript, middle of fourth century after 325 AD. It was discovered in 1844, so relatively recent manuscript. And as of today, is the oldest copy of the whole Testament surviving. So it's a pretty unbelievable um, piece of archaeology. All right. So what you're looking at here is the first page of the Gospel of Mark. And here on top, you're going to probably be able to read Kata Markan, okay, according to Mark. So this is the beginning of the Gospel of Mark. Now, on the bottom, you're seeing a bunch of letters here that probably don't tell you much and don't look like what we have just read before. Well, you have to consider a few things here. In this very ancient manuscript, first of all, they were using a particular script which involved only capitalized letters. So you see all these letters are capitalized letters of the Greek alphabet. Okay. The other peculiar thing is that you're not going to find any accent to guide you. You're not going to find any space between letters and between words. You're not gonna find any punctuation. You're not gonna find commas. You're not gonna find periods. So you're gonna really figure out yourself where a word ends and the next begins, where a period ends and the next begins. Pretty hard. Now, let's try to do that. Well, let's try to break it down in the words that are already familiar to us. So the first word, remember, was arche. Here it is, A-R-K-A. Okay, arche. There you go. That's the first word, alpha, rho, chi, eta. This H is the capitalized version of that letter that looked like an N, which is the long vowel E. Okay, arche, beginning. Then you have the definite article to, where this letter looks like a Y, is the capitalized version of the upsilon, of the U. Okay, so U. So archaic to, okay, beginning of, and then you have Evangelion, remember, and you have it right here, Evangeli, U, on the second line. So one word is split in two pieces, okay, on one line and on the next line, all right. And you see here these two gammas are the capitalized version of the gammas, okay. All right, beginning of the gospel And then we know that the Gospel of Mark says of Jesus Christ, right? Well, guess what? The first verse of the Gospel of Mark ends here, right here. This part is already the start of the second verse. Well, there are only four letters here. Where is Jesus Christ, Son of God? There's not enough letters. All right. Well, we need to be careful here. You see these bars on top? Well, these are used to indicate abbreviations. All right. So we have two abbreviations. So this is indicating that these are two separate words. This is the first word, an abbreviation of a word, and this is the abbreviation of another word. So how would they abbreviate? How would copies make their work easier? Well, if a word was coming up so many times, it was so common, instead of writing the whole word, all the letters of the word, they would just write the very first one and the very last one and put a bar on top to say to the reader, look, I didn't write a whole word, but you know what this means. Okay, so let's try to understand here. Remember, Jesus Christ. Well, Jesus, let's try to write Jesus. It was Yesu, right, in the genitive case. So there was an I, an iota, an eta, which capitalized looks like an H. Ye, this is like a capitalized sigma in this particular script. Ye, and then a Y. Yes, not a Y, a upsilon that looks like a Y. Yesu. Well, guess what? If I want to abbreviate this, I'm gonna just forget about the middle letters. I'm just gonna write the first one and the last one like this, iota and upsilon, and I'm gonna put a bar on top to say this means Yesu. There you go. You have it right there. All right, right there. Same thing, Jesu Christu. So let's try to write Christu. So there was a key, a row that looks like a P, right? Iota, a sigma that looks like a C, and then the tau, and then the usual ending omicron upsilon. Well, I don't want to write a whole thing. I just want to abbreviate this. I'm going to forget about all this letter. I'm just going to write the first one, the key, and the last one, the upsilon, and put a bar there. And there you have it. So this combination of word, iota upsilon with a bar on top, key upsilon with a bar on top, just means Jesu Christu. So of Jesus Christ. Pretty cool, pretty neat. Now, and again, here's where the verse ends. Where is Son of God? There's no Son of God here. In the Codex Siniaticus, and by the way, Codex Siniaticus comes from the place where it was discovered in the Sinai Peninsula. That's why it's called Codex Siniaticus. Doesn't have the expression Son of God. Well, wait a second. Do you see this part here in between the lines? I don't know if you noticed this. Well, what is that? This looks like an addition. This is an addition that was made by somebody that corrected the manuscript and thought that something was missing. What was missing? Well, it looks like two abbreviated words. You see the two bars here, one bar and another bar there. Okay, so let's try to write it here. It's two upsilon with a bar on top. So we know that this is going to be a word that starts with a upsilon and ends with a upsilon. Okay, the second word starts with a theta and ends again with a upsilon. Okay, so it's going to be a word that again starts with a theta and end with a upsilon. Then guess what? You already figured it out. This is exactly the abbreviation of UU Theu. There you go. There you have it. UU Theu. Son of God. So the Codex Siniaticus, the original manuscript, doesn't have this expression, but somebody, a corrector of the manuscript, felt the need to add it here because he thought that there was a very important omission here. Here you're looking at another very, very important manuscript. It's called the Codex Vaticanus. And as the word says, it's preserved in the Vatican Library. It's been there since probably the 16th century, actually the 15th century, but it was only discovered by scholars in the 16th century. The manuscript itself has been dated to the 4th century, exactly as the Codex Siniaticus. And before the discovery of the Codex Siniaticus, the Codex Vaticanus was considered really the most important manuscript ever in terms of Old Testament and New Testament. With the Codex Sinaiticus discovery, the Codex Siniaticus, the two are basically now on the same level, okay, of importance. Um, the Codex Vaticanus, though, does not contain 100% of the New Testament. All right, almost the whole thing, but not 100%. Now, what you're looking at here, again, is the first page of the Gospel of Mark. You read here very easily, Kata, Markan, okay, according to Mark. And you see this beautiful decoration on the manuscript. We're going to go over it. There's some differences in the script adopted here. Um, if you look at it quickly, you see that, for example, you're going to start seeing some signs here on top of some letters. Well, these are the accents that were not there in the Codex Siniaticus, okay, for example. So there's some additional things here in the Codex Vaticanus, not as plain as the Codex Siniaticus, and we're gonna go over it. So let's try to find the first verse of Mark that we are interested in, and this is the end of it. So forget about the rest. This first line and half of the second is Mark 1:1. Now look at this beautiful A here with these beautiful colors, great decoration. So this is the first letter, it's an alpha for RK. Okay, so you have the alpha here, and then you have a row that is a little damaged, the key and the eta. Okay, so this is the first word, RK, you recognize this. Then you have the definite article, to, tau, omicron, upsilon, and then you have the word evangelio. You can recognize it very easily, exactly as in the Codex Siniaticus. Here, evangelius, it's on the same line. All right, let's get to the most important part. Jesus Christ, Son of God, right? All right, we already know about the abbreviation, and here you find exactly the same thing. Look at here. So you have the iota and the upsilon with an abbreviation on top bar. Okay, this is, we know, Yesu. Okay, and then we have the key and the upsilon with a bar on top is the abbreviation for Christu. Okay, Yesu, Christu, and guess what? You also have this addition here before the end of the verse. You see? And this is exactly where this manuscript says, who you, Theu. So now it's interesting. Who you, it's written, the whole thing. There's no abbreviation here. You see, who you, all right? So upsilon, iota, omicron, upsilon. So the word son, it's spelled out completely with no abbreviation, while the word Theu is abbreviated with the first letter theta and the last letter upsilon. All right. So the Codex Vaticanus has the expression Son of God. This is another manuscript. It's called Codex Alexandrinus. As the word says, it was preserved in Alexandria, Egypt, and then throughout the centuries, it was sold and eventually ended up in the British Library in London, where right now it rests together with the Codex Siniaticus. All right, this codex is also one of the most important ones, together with the Sinaiticus and the Vaticanus. It's a little younger than them. It dates back to the 5th century, but still, it's considered definitely one of the most important manuscripts that contain almost all the Old and New Testament. All right, so as you can see, the letters are not as readable as in the other two codices. especially the very first line. This again is the start, the beginning of the Gospel of Mark. What helps us is that the very first line is also the very first verse. So Mark 1 1 ends exactly here. So we just have to look at the very first line. Let's try to find our words that we know of. Well, first of all, arche. It's right here, arche. Then we have the article, to. And then we can read pretty clearly Evangeliu, all right? Beginning of the gospel. Now we're supposed to find of Jesus Christ and possibly Son of God. Okay, so of Jesus Christ is Jesu Christou. And we know that the scribes like to abbreviate the names of Jesus. And in fact, we have it here, right? So this, it's clearly a upsilon with a bar on top that is almost visible, but clearly this is Jesu. This is clearly Christou, the abbreviation for Christou with a key and a upsilon with a bar on top. So of Jesus Christ. And then we know what the abbreviation of Son is, who you. Starts with a upsilon, ends with a upsilon, and it's abbreviated with a bar on top. So we have the expression Jesus Christ, Son, and then we're expecting to find of God, Theou, which is abbreviated with the theta and the upsilon. But here there's a lot of letters. Well, let's try to figure out what's going on here. Well, first of all, you see the abbreviation is at the end, on top of the last two letters, which we can reconstruct. This is very clearly a upsilon. Here is not, this letter is not that clear, but very likely is a theta where the upper part has been lost. So this is the abbreviation of Theou that we would expect. So Son of God. Well, what is this thing here? What are these three letters? Well, look at this. This is very likely, looks like a T, a tau, a T, right? And then you have your Omicron, and then you have your Upsilon. So in the Codex Alexandrinus, we have something that we didn't have in the Codex Siniaticus and Vaticanus. We have the article that probably you should be familiar with because it's exactly this one here. Okay. And it means of. Okay. Of the. Okay. So arche to Evangelium was the beginning of the gospel. Here they put the same article in front of God. So it's Jesus Christ, the Son of, literally would be of the God, right? Of the only God, right? Sometimes God takes the article, sometimes it doesn't. So it's not uncommon that in front of the word theos, when it identified the only true God, there's an article in front. So we have the article here, and so the expression is the same. Jesus Christ, the Son of God. This expression is also found, therefore, in Codex Alexandrinus. So, what's the conclusion? The conclusion is that very likely that expression, Son of God, is original. Really, the only manuscript that seems to not have that expression is the Sinaiiticus, which we know is a very important, if not the most important of all. But the other very important manuscript do have that expression, and on top of that, the Sinaiiticus also has that correction um, between the lines that add Son of God. So it's very likely that that part in the Sinaiiticus was an omission from the scribe. Now, even if not, that really doesn't change anything. Um, we cannot be 100% sure. It's again matter of interpretation or beliefs or feelings. My feeling is that it's very likely original, and I'm gonna give you a couple of reasons for well, actually three reasons why I think that is so. One is I don't believe the theory that Mark was not one of those disciples that considered Jesus to be divine or from God, and he wrote only a gospel around the human Jesus. okay, with all his power, but definitely a person, not divine. And then this idea that Jesus was actually the Son of God and God Himself incarnated was something that was invented later on and so on. I don't believe this kind of theories. I believe that Mark makes pretty clear that he believes that Jesus was the Son of God. Not only that, he implicitly, but we're going to see this next time, he implicitly declares Jesus to be God Himself incarnated. And to set the matter completely, we can jump to the end of the Gospel of Mark, chapter 15, verse 39. Jesus is on the cross, is dying on the cross, just died on the cross. At that point, the centurion, the Roman soldier that is there, looks at Jesus, and Mark make the centurion say these words: really, he was the Son of God, right? So finally, even a Gentile recognizes that Jesus was really the Son of God. So, um, you know, the theory that Mark, for some reason, was hesitant in defining or thinking Jesus to be the Son of God, or to have some divine attributes, is not there. That's, it's not supported by the evidence that Mark makes. The centurion says, "Hey, look, this was really the Son of God." So, makes total sense that as Mark put this expression at the end of his gospel, he would put it also at the very beginning, where he's stating the most important attribute of Jesus, being the Christ, meaning the Messiah, but also the Son of God. Um, the other important piece of information, pretty interesting, I find it pretty interesting, that I would like to share with you today, and this is the last one, and that makes me believe that that expression, Son of God, is original in the text of Mark, is if we synoptically compare the beginning, the start of the Gospel of Mark with the beginning of the Gospel of Matthew. We know that the two Gospel share more than 90% of the material. Mark is almost 100% within Matthew. Um, I like to believe that the very first verse of Matthew was kind of modeled on the very first verse of Mark. There's a lot of analogies there, and I'm gonna show you this type of analogy. What I'm trying to say here. If you look at the first verse of Matthew, you're gonna read something that is gonna look very, very familiar. Okay, first of all, there's Kata, which is according to Matthew, and then if you jump into the very first verse, you can read there Biblos Genesios, okay, which is record of the Genesis. Okay, remember that arche that Mark uses at the beginning, which reminds the beginning of the Genesis, and arche in the beginning. Well, Matthew transforms that arche that in Mark represents this new creation brought forth by the gospel, the good news proclaimed by Jesus, transform that arche into a similar term, which is Genesios, of the Genesis. Okay, Genesis is the genealogy of Jesus. Okay, so he shifts the focus from this new creation brought forth by the gospel to the creation of Jesus Himself, of the origin of Jesus, the genealogy of Jesus. All right, and if you keep reading, you're gonna find a lot of similarities with the verse of Mark. Look at that, Jesu Christou Uyu, and then Mark has Huyu Theu, possibly. Well, guess what? Matthew has Jesu Christou Huyu David Huyu Abraham. Very interesting. It seems to me that it's very likely that Matthew took the very first verse of Mark and adapted to his needs. And the needs were to change that expression, Son of God, in something more acceptable for his Jewish audience. and he transformed that huyu Theu in huyu David, huyu Abraham, son of David, son of Abraham. All right. So why would Matthew do something like that? Why would Matthew strip Jesus of the title Son of God and instead put associate to Jesus the title of Son of David and Abraham, which who are very important people, but definitely they're not God? Is somehow Matthew diminishing or trying to diminish the importance of Jesus? No, of course not. There's a very specific reason, very important reason here. We need to remember that when Mark writes, he's writing to an audience of Gentiles, of pagans, all right, of Romans and Greeks, okay? And these people were absolutely used to the idea of God having children. Okay, think about Zeus, think about the Latin Jupiter, okay, all their relationship with other goddesses, and all the children that they have. So the idea that a god may have a son would sound probably pretty normal to an audience of Gentiles. So Mark has no concern in putting that title right there at the beginning of his gospel. On the other hand, Matthew's writing for the Jews, okay, for the Jewish community, and he's very sensitive to that. He absolutely knows their psychology. The Jewish were not waiting for the Son of God to come. They were waiting for the Messiah. Now, the idea itself, the Son may have a God, was probably considered blasphemy at that time. All right. And very likely Jesus was put to death because he was proclaiming himself to be the Son of God. Right. That was the blasphemy. All right. That put himself to death. Now, Matthew is absolutely aware of this, and not to create the type of rejection of his gospel, he's hesitant to put the title at the very beginning. He doesn't want the Jews to reject his gospel right away, right from the very beginning. People say, "Hey, are you claiming this guy is the Son of God?" No, no, no. This is blasphemy. I'm not even gonna keep on reading your gospel, your book. So Matthew knows all of this and shifts the attention to the most important part of the Jewish messianic expectation. What were the Jews expecting? They were expecting the Messiah. Okay, and we know that one of the most important messianic prophecy about the Messiah was that the Messiah need to come from the house of David, needed to be a direct descendant of King David. That's exactly why Matthew is really concerned with the fact that the audience needs to understand that Jesus Christ is the Son of David, because that's one of the signs that define Jesus to be the true Messiah. The real concern about Matthew is that his Jewish audience understand that Jesus is really the Messiah, and let me prove it to you. Let me prove that he is the Messiah. The Messiah needs to be coming from the house of David. Let me prove this to you. I'm going to claim that he's the Son of God, and on top of that, the son of Abraham, and I'm going to write down every single name of his ancestors so that you can really realize that Jesus was the Messiah that you were waiting for. That's exactly why Matthew focused the attention on the fact that Jesus is the son of David, because he's saying to the audience Jews, look, I'm going to demonstrate to you that Jesus is the Messiah you were waiting for. And then while you accept this and while you keep reading through my gospel, I'm going to also demonstrate to you that Jesus is the Son of God. But that is going to be later on. So putting together all of this, I get to the conclusion that yes, Mark thought that Jesus was the Messiah that the Jews were waiting for, the Messiah that was prophesied in the Old Testament, and yes, Mark thought that Jesus was really the Son of God.